Now, breaking news continues this hour. We have just learned that the president of the United States, who's now been meeting with governors, the pool reporters are out of the room. We anticipate to be able to show you, just as we did with his cabinet members an hour ago, or less than that, his comments there. We're getting some notes. We know that he's talking with governors about a whole host of things, including the opening of the internet, sales tax, that sort of thing, or taxes, I should say, and Russian President Putin and whether or not he would be meeting with him. So a lot of questions coming up. We'll bring you that as it happens live. I want to bring back now my power panel. Chris Wilson, a Republican pollster, Dick Unger, co-host of Steele and Unger on Sirius XM. Before we went to break, Chris, you were talking about the situation right now with illegal immigration at the border. And I wanted to bring up, I had a Democrat on this hour, as we are wont to do here on Outnumbered Over Time, get everybody's perspective, Congressman Aguilar of Texas. He missed an opportunity. I asked him an easy question off the top. Can you give me some positive news from today? And do you know what he did not say? He did not say that we are no longer separating families at the border. And you say?
I think it illustrates the fact that Democrats have moved from, I think there was genuine concern over the weekend about this, to now trying to take advantage of it as a political issue. And it's unfortunate. Americans don't want families separated, but they also want a secure border. They don't want MS-13 gangs flying across the border. They don't want drug traffickers and human traffickers coming across the border. And so you've got to find a way to fix both of those issues. Right. And that's what they're doing.
I'll bring you gentlemen back when there's more time. Stay close. All right, the breaking news again. The president ending with the governors there at the White House. And now immigration votes. Will they happen? Here's Dana.
Fox News alert on the showdown over immigration. The House set to vote on a conservative bill with a vote on a second measure backed by moderates expected later this afternoon. Or will they actually be voted on? We'll find out. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. There is also breaking news on the southern border as First Lady Melania Trump makes a surprise visit to a shelter housing children in Texas. Mrs. Trump expressing her gratitude to workers there, with the president also weighing in.
Let me begin to recognize each of you and thanking you for all what you do, for your heroic work that you do every day, and what you do for those children.
We have to house these minors, and we have to house them safely. And frankly, we have to house them, and we should be taking good care of them, and then we should return them back home.
And we have Fox team coverage. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill. But we begin with Steve Harrigan. He is live in McAllen, Texas. Steve, what have we learned about the First Lady's visit?
Dana, the First Lady is back at the airport here in this border city of McAllen, Texas. She spent 2 hours on the ground here in a surprise visit in the wake of all this controversy over separating parents from their children. She visited one shelter on the south side of town run by Health and Human Services. That shelter houses 58 children. Some of those children crossed the border illegally on their own. Others have been removed from their parents. This wasn't one of the most controversial shelters, a tender age shelter. At this shelter, the age range was from 12 to 17. She had some pointed questions for the staff, also visited with the children. Here's what the First Lady had to say.
We all know they're here without their families. And I want to thank you for your hard work, your compassion, and your kindness you're giving them in these difficult times. I'm here to learn about your facility, and which I know you house children on a long-term basis. And I also like to ask you how I can help to these children to reunite with their families as quickly as possible.
The First Lady had scheduled a second stop at a customs detention center, but perhaps, as you can see behind me, the flash flooding here, that was canceled. Simply the road's too difficult to get around. We are also seeing what could be a real shift in policy. The Washington Post first reporting an unnamed senior advisor saying that the administration would no longer criminally charge parents who cross the border illegally with children. That's something that we're seeing on the ground here in McAllen this morning. 17 parents were in court facing a misdemeanor charge of crossing the border illegally. the case of all 17 parents dismissed immediately. So we could be seeing a real shift in policy on the ground here near the border. Dana, back to you.
And yet the Justice Department is saying there is no change. So we'll keep in touch with you, Steve, and find out if we can close that loop. Thank you so much. And back in Washington, the House is debating the first of two immigration bills the chamber is expected to take up today. But we're just learning of a delay of a vote on the second bill, which is called the Compromise Bill. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill with the latest developments. Mike, this literally broke within the last 3 minutes. What do you know?
Dana, you're absolutely right. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy telling reporters that they're going to hold off voting on the GOP leadership compromise bill that Paul Ryan and the president, everybody have been trying to push across the finish line. I'm told that a number of lawmakers were asking questions about what exactly is in the bill. And so McCarthy telling reporters they're going to hold off until tomorrow to give lawmakers a chance to review that compromise legislation to see if they can get 218 yes votes on it. There's also another plan from House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte, who made this pitch for people, lawmakers, to get this done.
Congress has a unique opportunity to act before the country ends up with another large population of who crossed the border illegally as children. Let's take this historic moment to come together and support vital legislation that provides common sense, reasonable solutions.
With uncertainty about whether they'll be able to pass anything, House Speaker Paul Ryan notes this issue is not going away.
DACA is broken. The immigration system is broken. The border is not fully secured. These are facts. They need to be solved. And at the end of the day, I really believe we will come back around. If a bill doesn't pass today, we're going to come back around to the president's 4 pillars.
So a very fluid situation here on Capitol Hill, hearing from the House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy that they're going to hold off on the second bill, the compromise bill, to see if they can rally enough support to get it across the finish line, perhaps tomorrow, Dana.
In the meantime, Mike, what are the top Democrats saying?
Well, they seem comfortable to sit back and watch Republican lawmakers struggle with the immigration issue once again. House Democratic Leader Nancy Pelosi blasted the GOP, accusing them for a lack of outreach.
They have not ever been interested. You know, they talk, and sometimes you all repeat it, that it's a compromise, but it is not a compromise. It may be a compromise with the devil, but it's not a compromise with the Democrats in terms of what they have in their bill.
And Senate Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer is downplaying Congress's ability to get anything done on immigration.
So Congress getting it done, it's not going to solve the problem, unfortunately, because immigration is such a contentious and divisive issue. The president has to do it himself, and let us hope he does.
Some Republicans counter that, suggests that the Democratic leader would rather have a campaign issue over a solution. Dana?
All right, Mike, thank you for that.
Every time we ask for resources, the Democrats say no. They say no to everything. They're obstructionists because they think that's good politically. I think it's bad politically. For them, I think it's bad politically. We'll see.
That was President Trump on immigration a short time ago, but the heated debate has some political analysts urging Republicans to switch their focus as we get closer to the midterms. My next guest says the party has to move the conversation back to the economy. Writing in the Wall Street Journal, they can take credit for supporting a bipartisan solution to one of America's thorniest issues while clearing the way for a fall election fought principally over the economy. I'm joined now by Karl Rove, former White House Deputy Chief of Staff and a Fox News contributor. To your point, Karl, I want to bring up a brand new Pew poll that has come out today that shows that the Republicans are trusted by 9 points over Democrats on the economy and 3 points on taxes. But the Democrats have a 14-point advantage over Republicans on immigration, which that number kind of surprised me. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, I think Republicans, if they can get a bill done in the House, send it over to the Senate and let Schumer obstruct it. And if that happens, the Republicans will have done the right thing in the House, and Schumer will have done the wrong thing in the Senate, and people will acknowledge that. Look, the Democrats couldn't solve this problem when they had 60 votes in the Senate and a large majority in the House, and they didn't really, frankly, even try. So now it's become an issue. It's becoming more of an issue, interestingly enough, if you look at the polls, because Democrats are prioritizing it, reacting to, example, the policy of separating children from their parents. But the Republicans can win this argument if they pass something constructive. And if the Senate Democrats block it, they're going to have to pay a political price. But the Republicans will have done the right thing by pursuing right policy. And look at it. It's not. Both of these bills, particularly the compromise bill, will be well received and popular with the American people.
So the president earlier today was at a roundtable, and I don't think I have that sound, but I can paraphrase it, basically saying that if you pass something in the House that can't pass in the Senate, have you wasted your time? And I guess that Mitch McConnell would probably say, like, let's not have this tit for tat going back and forth. But it would seem to me that they do have to pass something. And can they pass something narrow rather than something that's a little bit larger, like the compromise bill?
Well, earlier on Fox, Newt Gingrich was talking about incremental reform. And look, first, let's try and get one of these big bills passed. If they can't, get some smaller measures passed. But the American people want an answer to DACA. They want the borders to be secured. They want the immigration system to be less dependent upon, are you somebody's cousin, and more on, do you have a skill or are you an entrepreneur? And they want to get rid of the diversity lottery in which 55,000 people are chosen by random from across the world and allowed to come to the United States. So all of these things are contained in the compromise bill. And if the Republicans were to pass that bill, the American people would say they're trying to do a constructive, good thing. And that might actually cause some Democrats in the Senate to say, you know what, let's stop just talking and let's get something done.
Well, I did want to ask you that from a strategy standpoint, because you have Democrats saying that Republicans, you heard Nancy Pelosi, she says it's not really a compromise, that basically the Republicans are just too restrictionist on immigration and that they're not going to go for that. And then you have Republicans almost in lockstep saying the Democrats have nothing to offer, they are only for open borders. Both of those things aren't exactly the case. So what would it take to try to figure out a way to go forward on this? Like, who's the leader that can figure out a way to bring these people together? And are people demanding it in the country, or is it something that as the summer goes by, as the migration flows sort of ebb, will it just go away again?
Well, I don't think those pictures are going to go away anytime soon, which is why the Republicans have got to do something. Otherwise, in my opinion, they're going to leave a bad impression in the minds of particularly suburban, independent, Republican-leaning women whom they need to carry in order to hold on to the House this fall. But back to your point about who's the person out there to make it happen? There's no one person. When you've got Pelosi in the House being political about it and Schumer in the Senate being political about it, remember, Schumer voted to build the border wall when you and I were working in the White House.
Right.
And today he now finds the wall to be, a symbol of evil. And yet he voted for it, as did Hillary Clinton and a vast number of other Democrats. We have 650 miles of wall or barrier along the southern border. Most of the money that President Trump is talking about is not going to go to build new wall. Yeah, there's going to be some new wall, several dozen miles, but most of it is to firm up and better structure that wall that we now have along the border that they voted for, that Democrats voted for.
I know. Well, I guess we're going to see. You're going to delay this compromise vote until tomorrow. We'll see if they'll be able to get it all solved before then and maybe get it over to the Senate. Karl Rove, thank you. The House voting now on the first of two immigration bills, with the vote on a second delayed until tomorrow. We'll talk to a congressman from Texas on what we can expect to happen. Fox News Alert, the House rejecting the first of two immigration bills, a more conservative bill, by 231 to 193. And we've just learned that a vote on the second bill has been delayed until tomorrow. Let's bring in Republican Congressman Michael Burgess of Texas. He's a member of the Immigration Reform Caucus and the Rules Committee. Sir, I believe you just voted for the Good Lot bill, the more conservative bill, and you probably aren't that surprised to learn that it has failed. Your thoughts?
Correct. And it wasn't a foregone conclusion that I would vote for it. There were obviously things that I liked, things that I didn't like. The fact that E-Verify was mandatory in this bill, I thought was a big plus over the next bill it will have. I didn't like the addition of a big guest worker program right at the last minute. I thought that was a little bit too much, and the the bottom line is that it didn't have the votes to pass. Now, I would tell you I don't think the prospects for tomorrow's bill are any better than I thought. Really, the chance was on this bill, and that's one of the reasons that I voted for it, was to try to push it up over the top.
Right.
But it wasn't to be, and now we'll have to regroup. What worries me always in this business is at some point we'll reject everything and then get a much worse bill as a compromise come at us down the road. So for the people who are ideologically pure on this, you can sometimes paint yourself into a corner where something gets done that is really counterproductive.
Certainly, because you're from Texas, you've had a lot of experience with this, and you're on the Immigration Reform Caucus. And I want to ask you, because for the Democrats that you talk to, your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I mean, do you find that they're only for open borders, or is there some room there for a compromise, do you think, down the road?
No, I don't. And I spent hours in the Rules Committee last night listening to their rhetoric. I spent hours on the House floor listening to their rhetoric. Honestly, I think anything short of just simply opening the borders and saying, we'll take all comers. Now, in fact, I offered that as a suggestion last night in the Rules Committee. If that's where we're going to be, then let's send down transportation to Central America and pick everybody up and bring them up here. Don't make them ride on the top of a train across Mexico. That's cruel and inhumane.
We know that, of course, immigration issues from the founding of our country have been riled with passion. And you had a town hall on Monday night. Listen to something that you experienced on Monday. I want to get your take on this.
I think there's a lot of people in here who are heartbroken. They are not U.S. citizens, but they are human beings, and we're scared for them.
I know that you have talked about how you care for the children as well. Tell me about your thoughts about your constituents, what you're hearing from them.
Well, town halls have become kind of an odd exercise, and a lot of members aren't doing them anymore for just that reason. I consider that as part of my obligation. It's part of my communications plan every year. I need to meet with constituents, mind you, during some of the parts of the not the previous administration, but the administration before that. You may remember there were some times where town halls were pretty contentious, but it's part of the job. And let's be honest, you announce a town hall and somebody says, "Oh, I like everything he's doing. I don't need to go." Great, but the person who's got a beef, they're the ones who are going to be there, and that's pretty much what you see. George Will several years ago said the country was evenly divided but not sharply divided. Since you left the White House, Dana, it's sharply divided.
Yeah, I think everyone has sharpened up their elbows a little bit. Let me have you just react to this last thing, sir, before I let you go. Sure. This is a statement from the Health and Human Services Department saying that on reunification on the Trump executive order, it is still very early and we are awaiting further guidance on the matter. Reunification is always the ultimate goal of those entrusted with the care of unaccompanied minors, and the administration is working towards that for those minors currently in HHS custody. And that was from an official there at HHS. I know that is one of a concern that people have, which is understanding that all of this is just going to be dealt with, but the reunification issue does seem to be like a sticky point.
Oh, I don't think so. I think it will. It will happen. I mean, there'll always be stories. I was encouraged to see the First Lady down at the border today. I actually called the White House on Monday and encouraged the President himself to take a trip to the border. President Obama would not do that, and I always thought that was a big mistake. The President did go down while he was in the campaign side. I think it'd be appropriate for the President to visit the border as well, hear from the men and women who are working for him, doing the Customs and Border Enforcement, and over the ORR office is under my subcommittee's jurisdiction on energy and commerce. I will tell you, I think they do a good job. It's a tough job that they have. But in the last administration, I had to fight to even get a doctor down to ORR to look into, are we letting people with communicable diseases into this country? Right. The Obama administration was pretty insensitive to that.
Right. Well, and then of course you're a doctor too. We have to make you work double duty. All right, Congressman Michael Burgess, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
The Trump administration is taking a closer look at asylum claims and how that's playing out at the border.
And the percentage of asylum claims found to be meritorious by our judges has declined significantly. That's because The vast majority of the current asylum claims we're seeing are not valid.
There are questions about the way illegal immigrants are processed at the Mexico border, especially when it comes to those claiming asylum. In a decision issued last week, Attorney General Jeff Sessions said immigration judges generally cannot consider domestic and gang violence as grounds for asylum. Quote, the mere fact that a country may have problems effectively policing certain crimes, such as domestic violence or gang violence, or that certain populations are more likely to be victims of crime, cannot itself establish an asylum claim. Michael Moore is a former U.S. attorney for the Middle District of Georgia, and I wanted to get your take on this. You know, the president says that these people crossing the border are coached, given a password to ask for asylum, that you say, I'm being harmed in my country is extremely dangerous, I fear for my life, and then you get into the asylum process. And I'm just wondering what you think about that in terms of domestic violence and gang violence. Should that qualify under the asylum claims?
I think it probably shows a lack of understanding by the Attorney General of the realities of some of these folks in their home countries. And I think even when you listen to the president, he's talked about the dangers of gangs like MS-13 and the havoc they can wreak. As a matter of fact, it's part of his justification for saying that he doesn't want some of these immigrants coming into the country. So he's not on the same page with the Attorney General. And again, I think that it tells me that the Attorney General is divorced from reality about the harm that can come in some of these countries. Gang violence, domestic violence, those are real. And he seems to not.
So a question for you on the law, though. So on the law, so when you're claiming asylum, do you need to be able to show that your government cannot protect you, or that your government in your home country is actually the one that would come after you? Because I'm not sure if we can handle, domestic violence or gang activity violence, all of those types of claims from across the world. I'm just wondering what the law says on that.
Well, the first thing is to apply for asylum in an affirmative sense, you have to be in the country. And so these folks have come over here and they've applied for it.
Oh, okay.
And then they make their claim. And that's, if anybody wants to go look at the Homeland Security website, it tells you right on there, and it tells everybody around the world, I guess, that can get on the internet, that in fact you have to be in the United States to make that affirmative asylum application. And so I get that we're not talking about a gang of teenagers at a high school stealing somebody's lunchbox. We're talking about people where a lot of the governments in these countries are in fact run by the gangs.
Right.
And where it's an organized crime syndicate in these countries that rape and pillage and plunder, and people try to escape that. So, and again, we're not talking about somebody applying for asylum in the United States because they've had a fight on Friday night about who's going to handle the remote control. That's not the domestic violence we're talking about. But we're talking about gang violence, we're talking about serious gang violence where the governments are not protecting
and
these
where they are
individuals, in fact,
recruiting children, and where they are recruiting children. And actually, I have a guest coming up from the Wall Street Journal who can talk to me a little bit more about the actual violence happening there. Let me ask you about the number of immigration judges. Senator Ted Cruz proposed legislation saying we should have, I don't know how it was doubling, but 750 more judges down there on the border in order to process these claims. The president doesn't seem to think that's a realistic thing or something that needs to be done. But just from a pure process standpoint, how overloaded are the immigration judges that work for the United States right now?
They're overloaded, and so are your prosecutors who handle immigration cases. The immigration judges are appointed by the Attorney General. My guess is that they're using this as a funding battle in Congress, and they want to see funding for a wall versus funding for additional judges, and that way when you roll into the midterms, there are things to talk about. But prosecutors don't handle this, and we expected as federal prosecutors to have to balance resources, make decisions about priorities. And then that's oftentimes that you saw that we did not go after these misdemeanor cases about simple illegal entry into the country. You certainly went after reentry offenders, but these misdemeanor cases didn't draw a priority in the office.
Right.
That's exactly right. And while we give deference to administration changes and policies, this seems to be a clear effort to make a political statement more than it does to use the Department of Justice and its resources as an effective law enforcement tool.
Well, certainly those judges are asked to do a heck of a lot of work. All right, Michael Moore, thank you.
Glad to be.
Hundreds of children separated from their families at the Mexican border arriving here in New York City. So how will they be reunited with their families? We'll have an update. Plus, we will look at why so many people are fleeing their countries and how drugs in this country plays a role. And be sure to check out my weekly podcast with Chris Starwalt. I'll tell you what, go to foxnewspodcast.com, and it's available on iTunes or wherever you listen. Hundreds of migrant children arriving in Bristow, Virginia, and Homestead, Florida, as well as New York City from the U.S.-Mexican border. Many of them are now in children's centers as authorities face the challenge of reuniting them with their families. And Brian Yennis joins us live from Harlem. Brian.
Hi, Dana. Well, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo just said that the state estimate of the number of children that are in his state that have been separated from their families at the border is 700. That is the number that he says that they've just estimated on that. Now, he says that kids are continuing to come here last night and this morning. And here at the Cayuga Family Center in East Harlem, there are as many as 239 children. Take a look at this video. All day, yesterday and today, we've seen these kids being dropped off and picked up by their foster parents at this center. Many of the children were separated. Others arrived at the border without parents. The youngest that we are told is here is a 9-month-old baby. This is a daycare center. Inside, they're taught English. They receive mental health counseling. I'm told many of the kids arrive here with lice and bed bugs. Some consistently cry and ask for their parents. Now, New York City's Mayor Bill de Blasio visited the border today. Yesterday, he visited this center, and this is what he said.
How is it possible that none of us knew there were 239 kids right here in our own city? How is the federal government holding back that information from the people of this city? There's no question these kids are getting support here. The bottom line is they should never have been taken from their parents.
Governor Andrew Cuomo says that his frustration is that he has no idea where these kids are or directly how many kids there are, and that's because these state agencies are under federal gag orders and aren't allowed to speak to them. Dana.
Brian, what do we know about the process of how these kids are going to be reunited with their parents?
So since 2012, we've had those thousands of unaccompanied minors, and it really overwhelmed the borders. So HHS started to really get help from 100 shelters throughout 17 states with these unaccompanied minors. The average stay for these unaccompanied minors in these shelters is 57 days, and then they are reunited with a family member or a sponsor that's deemed worthy of that. Now we know that HHS says ultimately that it's still very early, and they do not know how these kids are going to be reunited. This is a much different situation. These children, the 2,300 plus that were separated at the border, were separated through no fault of their own, and their parents are in detention. So the question is, will they be kept in detention with their parents? Will they be released with other sponsors? We simply do not know. Dana?
All right, well, we'll keep on top of it and inform everybody when we do. What we're seeing at the border is just the tip of the iceberg. Part of the problem stems from people fleeing corrupt regimes and gang violence across Central America. And as President Trump said today, drugs play a big role here.
They encourage people, frankly, to walk through Mexico and go into the United States because they're drug traffickers, they're human traffickers, they're coyotes. I mean, we're getting some real beauties. Mexico is doing nothing for us except taking our money and sending us drugs.
But consider this. In the last decade, Americans have put about $1 trillion in the pockets of the cartels, severely straining local governments. And Mary Anastasia O'Grady is an opinion columnist for the Wall Street Journal. I read her every week, every Monday, and it's a pleasure to have you on because I feel like this is the root cause. Like, how can we stop dealing with this every year, this problem at the border? How could we deal with the root cause? Is it even solvable?
No, I think you're absolutely right. We have to talk about why Central America has been flipped upside down. Remember that drugs used to be trafficked through the Caribbean, and then the anti-drug forces started pushing down on the Caribbean, and they started bringing up the drugs up Central America and through Mexico. And the problem, as you point out, $1 trillion overwhelms these poor governments that have very fragile institutions. I mean, the big part of economic development is institution building. So you have a rule of law, and then you can attract investment and you can create jobs, all those kinds of things. They're not happening because this is sort of overwhelming that institution building.
And do we have, the president is frustrated, saying that Mexico, maybe other countries, are not doing enough to help us. He's even talked about perhaps cutting off aid to those countries. Is that a good idea?
Well, first of all, I think when the president says that, they're putting drugs in our country, I mean, they would say, you are creating this demand for drugs. You're sending this money here. You are empowering these organized crime networks, and we can't fight them. So stop using drugs. And of course, that hasn't worked. Americans have a huge appetite for drugs. So I think we have to take some responsibility there. The other thing is we have to think about our foreign policy, what the State Department does, and the ideology that the State Department so often imposes on these countries. Right now, we have a UN agency in Guatemala that is undermining the private sector. Why? Because they have an ideology which is that rich people are the problem, and we have to make income equality in Guatemala, and that is their political objective. And in trying to impose that political objective, they're completely undermining the rule of law. They're destroying the environment for investment. They're destroying the business community. And a lot of people who come here are not necessarily fleeing violence per se. I think that happens more in Honduras and El Salvador. But in Guatemala, we've just destroyed the economy with this UN agency. You cannot get the politicians in Washington to pay attention to this. They're all at the border screaming about these people coming up as if they're complete freeloaders. Look at what U.S. policy has done to Guatemala.
Well, maybe they will pay attention now because we got you to talk about it. I do want to ask you one question because Michael Moore, the former U.S. attorney, was on talking about asylum claims and for moms and dads who legitimately are leaving, say, Honduras because they are afraid of for their lives in Honduras because of gang activity, or they're afraid that the gangs are going to try to recruit their children, so they bring them here. Is that a legitimate asylum claim, or could we actually do something in our own national interest to help Honduras to try to deal with a better rule of law, or is it futile?
Well, I would say that's a very heavy lift. I mean, and it's a long-term project. I'm not against it, but what I am against is foreign aid, just aid to end poverty by giving money to the governments that are corrupt in the first place,
but
and
if you gave it,
that's going to change
should we do more on our own than to protect our own national interests? I mean, is there something that we should do about drugs and the drug trafficking?
Well, I mean, the answer to the drugs, and Milton Friedman said this many times, is it's a demand problem, not a supply problem. And as long as you have people who are so eager to get those drugs, the businesses that are selling the drugs will find them and sell them to them. And we've been at this war on drugs for 70 years. And there's a pretty consistent demand for drugs in this country. So I think we might have to admit that we play a role in this.
Indeed. Okay, everybody should follow Mary Anastasia O'Grady. She's at the Wall Street Journal. Check her out. You can read her every Monday. Officials are calling for calm as hundreds take to the streets protesting the fatal police shooting of a black teenager in East Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 17-year-old Antoine Rose was shot 3 times as he ran from a car during a traffic stop.
I just told my kids to go in the house, and then I see him had the car pulled over. And the next thing I know, he's shooting the boy. Just running. He didn't have no, he just ran. Running is not a death sentence.
Investigators say Rose did not have a weapon and nobody fired at the officer who opened fire. But police say 2 handguns were found on the floor of the car. It was the officer's first day on the job. Is Ted Cruz's Senate challenger making gains in Texas because of the immigration debate? Plus, new polls showing a lead for Joe Manchin in West Virginia. So what can the Republicans do to reverse the recent momentum? Our panel will weigh in next.
I'm Trace Gallagher in for Shep. More ahead on the immigration drama on Capitol Hill. The House rejecting one bill and delaying a vote on another. Plus, a former Army Ranger told he would never walk again is now climbing mountains. I'll tell you about him and other wounded warriors getting back in action with the help of one very special program. That's coming up on Shepard Smith Reporting.
Now to the midterms and the impact of the immigration fight in Texas. Some say Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke is gaining steam as he focuses on that issue in his Senate race against incumbent Ted Cruz. Joining me now is Alex Conan, former communications director for Senator Marco Rubio and partner at Firehouse Strategies, and Juan Williams, Fox News political analyst and co-host of The Five. Glad to have you here. Okay, so on the whole Beto O'Rourke thing, I followed it when he was running in his primary, and then Ted Cruz got more votes than all of the Democratic candidates combined. So I sort of felt like that's impossible that Ted Cruz could lose, but am I wrong?
It's not impossible. Look, there's enough Democrats in Texas so that theoretically he could lose. If they all turned out to vote in an off-year election, he could lose. And I think that's what his team is a little bit worried about, is this Democratic enthusiasm. We're saying, look, Ted Cruz should win, but it could be a very close race.
Is Beto O'Rourke the kind of candidate, Juan, that Democrats should be looking towards for their future hopes? And maybe they don't win this election, but maybe in the coming years, in the next few elections, they might be able to pick up some steam there.
Well, I don't know, because when you think back to the Democratic primary, Beto O'Rourke squeezed by, actually.
Yeah.
And it was a surprise to a lot of people because he had establishment backing, but the money didn't flow in the way that I think Alex would be accustomed to for the leading candidate. So the question is whether or not he has that kind of appeal to energize the Democrats that are necessary to turn out in large numbers to win. The key here, Dana, on the immigration issue is that now he's leading marches to the border and saying, hey, this is my issue, and using it as a wedge, and apparently an effective wedge at this moment, which is why he's getting closer.
But Ted Cruz was quick to come out with a solution, right? Well, his idea of a solution, a very narrowly targeted bill.
Yeah, he's handled this issue very well, which is he's talked about what he's for rather than what he's against. He's offered common sense solutions for handling the immigration issue in Texas, which is ground zero for our immigration issue.
The question is, though, how does he separate himself from the president?
Well, he's going to need the president's support, and the president's.
He might not have to.
Yeah.
Why is that then?
Well, I do think because the president seems like he wants to get something done. I think that he would be for that, but he wants to be pretty tough. And I just think that the president has shown even this week that he's willing to backtrack a little bit if he has to. So I don't think Ted Cruz will have to worry about that.
If all Trump supporters turn out and vote for Cruz this fall, Cruz is going to be fine.
Yeah. Right. But I want to ask you about West Virginia, though, because that's a race where Republicans are hoping that they could flip that Senate seat. Take a look at this new Monmouth poll. The West Virginia Senate general election, Joe Manchin at 48% right now, Patrick Morrisey at 39%. And then you've got Don Blankenship, who lost the Republican primary but says he's going to run as an independent or on the conservative ticket at 4%. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it doesn't look like Blankenship's actually going to be on the ballot this fall. In a head-to-head race, this is a single-digit race. Manchin, I think, is too liberal for West Virginia. This is a state that Trump won by over 40 points just in 2016. Look, if all of Trump supporters go on to support the president, vote for the Republican, we should pick up that seat. But Manchin's a very good politician. He's navigated the state well in the past. It's going to be a close race.
What do you think, Juan? Because even just yesterday, I was in West Virginia yesterday for West Virginia Day, I might add, just by coincidence. But one of the congressional races now has even gone from likely Republican to maybe a toss-up, that the Democrat is gaining steam there.
I think what you have to keep in mind is someone like Manchin, he was the governor of the state, very popular in the state, and he, unlike Shelley Moore Capito, who took the Senate seat for Republicans, the other Senate seat, I think he still is very active and has the kind of network and funding necessary to do this. If Blankenship is to stay on the ballot, and I don't think he's going to because of the sore loser law and all the rest, and that will be contested in the courts. But if he stays on the ballot, I don't think there's any way Manchin loses.
Well, look, Manchin votes against the president far too often for his own political good in a state like West Virginia.
Right. But maybe, though, they like that independence, though. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. Let me ask you about one last thing. There's a Suffolk University poll. We look at the generic ballot. We don't live by it, but we look at it. In March, the Republicans were up by 15%. I'm sorry, Democrats were up 15%. Thank you. Nice little man in my ear. But right now it's down to just 6% lead on Republicans. So Republicans have certainly done a little bit better. And there seems to be this movement, Alex, by younger Democrats to distance themselves from Nancy Pelosi, saying that they want to have new leadership.
That's absolutely right. Look, Nancy Pelosi is the best thing the Republicans have going for themselves right now. She is kind of like Hillary Clinton was in 2016. She does not. Nobody in the Democratic Party is excited about Nancy Pelosi. Young Democrats don't want to turn out to vote for people like Hillary Clinton or Nancy Pelosi. They need a next generation of leaders to be more successful.
Juan, I only have 15 seconds. Well, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I think this all started with Conor Lamb in Pennsylvania 18, Dana, where he said clearly he would not vote for her for leader. And I think Nancy Pelosi's response was anything to get more Democrats elected.
She seems to just let that all roll off her back.
Yeah, that's
she doesn't care. I wish I was less sensitive as well. All right, Alex Conant and Juan Williams, everybody, thank you. So do you shop online? Well, a Supreme Court decision could make it a little more expensive. We'll explain.